Reporting from the earthquake in Turkey, I'm David Muir. Wherever the story, we'll take you there. You're streaming ABC News Live.
Welcome back, everyone. Today's arraignment adds another first to Donald Trump's presidential record, but he's not the first to face legal peril. Here's a look at Trump's records and the history of presidential legal troubles by the numbers. Trump was the first president without government or military experience, first to be impeached twice, and first to aggressively challenge the certification of his successor. Now, as he campaigns to return to the White House in 2025, Trump has become the first former president to ever be indicted. But he's not the first to ever be arrested. That record goes to Ulysses S. Grant. Back in 1872, Grant was taken into custody for racing his horse and buggy on the streets of the Capitol. Washington, D.C. police say the presidential speed demon was stopped by police several times. And he certainly was not the first to face legal trouble. Back in 1974, Richard Nixon may have narrowly avoided criminal charges related to the Watergate scandal when President Ford pardoned him. In 2001, Arkansas suspended Bill Clinton's law license for 5 years over the Monica Lewinsky scandal. And some historians wonder about Warren Harding's fate. Had he not died in office in 1923, numerous officials around him were implicated in corruption scandals. But in the end, the big number of the day, 34, the number of felony counts Trump is now charged with as he etches his name into the history book. Coming up, our coverage of the arraignment of former President Donald Trump continues in just 90 seconds. Stick with us.
No matter what type of dog you have, or cat you have, Frontline Plus lets you take them everywhere, no matter how you define it. Frontline, the #1 name in flea and tick protection.
Dove invited women who wanted their damaged hair trimmed.
Yes, I need a trim.
I just want to be able to cut the damage.
We tried Dove instead. So, still need that trim?
Oh my gosh! I'm actually shocked. I don't need a haircut.
Don't trim daily damage. Stop it with Dove.
And the love so deep we cannot measure. Ain't nobody loves me better. Makes me happy, makes me feel this way. Ain't nobody loves me better than you. Ain't nobody.
More Americans choose ABC News, America's #1 news source.
For all you everyday explorers plotting your next adventure, fuel your curiosity with Nat Geo. Subscribe today.
Welcome back, everyone. We continue our coverage of the criminal felony charges against former President Donald Trump. A surreal day in American history. Trump seen here arriving to his residence in Mar-A-Lago after spending less than 24 hours in his hometown of New York City, where his fingerprints were taken, just like any other criminal defendant. At the center of it all, alleged hush money payments made to 3 people: adult film actress Stormy Daniels, a Trump Tower doorman, and another woman who alleged having a sexual relationship with the former president. With the presumption of innocence on his side, what will this mean for the top GOP candidate heading into 2024, the party at large, and possibly for our country? Let's bring in Democratic California Congressman Jimmy Gomez for a view on how those on the left are reacting tonight. Congressman, thank you so much for joining us. Manhattan DA Alvin Bragg laid out an alleged catch-and-kill scheme to bury negative press and said that Trump falsified business records to conceal criminal activity. What's your reaction to these charges?
I think this is a sad day in America, but it shouldn't be a surprise because this individual, Donald Trump, didn't have the respect of the rule of law before he was elected to office as a businessman and even as president. So this is a first in our history where somebody's actually indicted that's a former president. But this is not Donald Trump was also the first president to be impeached twice. So we want to say that no one's above the law, that they're going to be held accountable no matter if they're in office or out of office, and that this is a serious situation. But there is a process, and the evidence will be laid out, and he'll be tried by a jury of his peers. And if they're convinced, he'll be found guilty, and hopefully he'll do a little bit of time.
If these allegations are true, Do you think that it did have an impact on the 2016 election? Do you think that his supporters would have said, oh, I'm not going to vote for him because he paid that hush money to a porn star?
Honestly, I don't think so. Maybe it would have made a difference at the margins, but Donald Trump was elected, I believe, in large part because he was a celebrity. Americans felt like they knew him, or a big chunk of Americans felt like they knew him, and he seemed to get away with a lot of different accusations and facts that would have brought any normal politician down. So I'm not sure if this would have had a profound impact on the change of the election, but I think that's kind of besides the point. I think this is what it's about, is that if you break the law, you try to cover it up, people are going to find out, and you're going to be held accountable.
But I am curious, though, to see your take on some Republicans who are saying that, look, this is politically motivated. That's all this is just theater.
I think it's nonsense. I think that one thing that we're hearing is that the Republicans in the party are still at the beck and call of Donald Trump, despite what people are saying, and that the Republican Party is captured by the extreme MAGA wing of their party, Marjorie Taylor Greene and George Santos. Although Kevin McCarthy and Mitch McConnell are the figureheads, it is Marjorie Taylor Greene, George Santos, and Donald Trump who are the neck that turn the head. So everybody's gonna fall in line. But this is not about politicization. This is about seeking justice and making sure people are held accountable.
Curious, though, I mean, it is kind of interesting. Polls show that Trump is still leading in the Republican race for the 2024 election. Looking forward, what kind of impact do you think that this will have on your party's attempts to regain the House and keep the Senate?
Well, I think what we have to do is show that how under Biden, the Democrats have delivered. We had one of the best 2 years legislative sessions in the history of this Congress. We were able to pass an infrastructure law that's going to rebuild our roads and bridges and also put us into the 21st century when it comes to digital. And then we also passed the Inflation Reduction Act that had the largest inflation investment in our green economy in the history of our country. So we need to campaign on our accomplishments, because then that's how we're going to show who delivers for the American people. Right now, the Republicans don't even have a plan to deal with the debt limit and the budget. And we're heading towards a financial crisis if they don't get their act together. So we're going to campaign on those issues. I think if we stick to that, we're going to win. And I think we're on the verge of taking back the House, only 5 seats short. And I think Joe Biden is in a good position to win the presidency in 2024.
Congressman Jimmy Gomez, we thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
What does today mean for the Republican Party? Joining us now is ABC News contributor and former Republican Congresswoman from Virginia, Barbara Comstock. Thank you so much for joining us. Many Trump loyalists like Ted Cruz, as you know, Josh Hawley, Marjorie Taylor Greene, they are voicing their support for the president. Some of them are going to be at Mar-A-Lago tonight. But Senator Mitt Romney, who's more of your traditional Reagan Republican, also defended Trump. And he said, I believe President Trump's character and conduct make him unfit for office. Even so, I believe the New York prosecutor has stretched to reach felony criminal charges in order to fit a political agenda. No one is above the law, not even former presidents, but everyone is entitled to equal treatment under the law. The prosecutor's overreach sets a dangerous precedent for criminalizing political opponents and damages the public's faith in our justice system. Were you all surprised by Mitt Romney's response?
Well, he did say, let the process go forward, which I agree with. And I do think this scheme, which was an attempt to defraud people in 2016 when I was on the ballot, very much was an attempt to, defraud the American people. And I went back, it wasn't in the indictment, but I went back and looked at it, and in Michael Cohen's indictment, and Stormy Daniels came forward on October 8th to try and put that story forward to the National Enquirer. And that was a day after October 7th, when the Access Hollywood tape came out. So this whole attempt to keep her quiet through the election was very much meant, they were paying her off and keeping her quiet through the election. That was very much part of an election fraud. So let's let Alvin Bragg go forward and prove his case. This whole indictment did not have a lot of the detail in it yet. It also mentioned tax fraud in it, which the details aren't there yet. So, you're going to hear a lot of this later on. This is just the opening of the indictments kickoff season for Donald Trump. You're still going to have the Georgia case. You're going to have the January 6th case, the document cases. So I think there's going to be a whole lot more cases, which I think a lot of the members of Congress are going to be a lot more interested in those. And those are a lot more problematic for Trump. But the real problem for the party is they are lashing themselves to Trump, giving him this support with the base, which is giving him, more support with the base at the very same time he is losing, he doesn't have any more support with the general electorate. If you go to Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin, he has not gained a single voter from 2020 from Joe Biden. So he will not win a general election. So you are strengthening somebody in the primary who won't be able to win a general election. So this is very destructive to the Republican Party. So while I don't have a dog in this fight anymore, because if Donald Trump's the nominee, I will not be supporting him. I know Mitt Romney won't be either. To in any way excuse any of his faults, including the fact that he was defrauding the American people in 2016 at a time when he had, this is a man who has, lived on the edge of the law his entire career and life. The fact that the law is now catching multiple fronts, including next month when he has to testify in a civil case about an alleged rape. This is somebody who is, even, I would argue, kind of defrauding these people he's asking for money from.
Do you think that's what's going to happen tonight?
This at a time when he's going to use it for his legal defense instead of running for election.
Do you think that's what's going to happen tonight?
Tonight? Oh, yeah. He was sending out, pitches to give him more money. And I don't think this money is really going to be going to running for election, even though it's going to help him maybe get the nomination. He's using it to pay his lawyers, because you're seeing that's where a lot of this money is going, to his legal team that sure didn't look like they had their act together today. If you looked at their post-indictment press conference, they were all speaking over each other. It was just one hot mess. And, all the reports of them infighting, as usual, Donald Trump's team, he's always changing the team, changing the lawyers. The last legal team hasn't gotten their bills paid, and the team before hasn't gotten their bills paid. This is just going to be one drama after another. The general public is sick of Trump. They voted him out in 2020, why they voted out so many of his supported candidates in 2022, why Republicans keep sticking with this loser. I don't know. When he's lost, his elections and lost for Republicans ever since 2016, it's a mystery to me. But you look at who's down there, it's Roger Stone and Marjorie Taylor Greene and Matt Gaetz and all the losers around him. So it's the sore team.
We'll leave it there. Barbara Comstock, appreciate your analysis and insight. Thank you.
Yeah.
Now let's bring in ABC News political director Rick Klein, who joins us now. Rick, today's arraignment is certainly historical for a former president, but he's also a candidate. How are potential voters, in your opinion, just a few hours late now, responding to the charges?
It's such an interesting moment, Lindsay, because there's been a range of polls that have actually shown President Trump getting stronger as more information has come out around these indictments, particularly inside the Republican Party. But we've also got evidence that points in a somewhat different direction. We had a poll with Ipsos that came out on Sunday before all the details were made public, but once people knew the general contours of the charges, and we found that 45% of Americans, a strong plurality, felt like these charges were appropriate. It's interesting to see also that some voters are kind of staying on the sidelines, taking in more information. So I'm not ready to say that anyone's a political winner or loser based on these events. I think there's a possibility that voters kind of grow tired of the whole accumulated Trump mess. It's also possible that this emboldens and empowers his base a bit more. Things are going to be playing out in a really interesting way.
We've heard from a number of Republican leaders attacking Bragg for prosecuting this case, but on the core facts of the case, you really don't hear much.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that's actually really telling here, Lindsay, is that from his political opponents in the Republican Party, most are saying that, look, this shouldn't be a prosecution that's happening. But how many of them are willing to defend the details that are put in the indictment? How many are willing to step forward and say it's okay if he paid hush money to a porn star to cover up an affair right before a campaign? It's okay if he covered that up. It's okay that he falsified business records. Look, it may be that this case doesn't hold its own water in terms of being a legal case that carries felony convictions, but the underlying details of this are important, and I actually think that might be where there's political vulnerability, keeping in mind that this is going to play out in the same time that the Republican primary voters are making up their mind. Will there just be a sense of just too much, or a sense that maybe there's just something bad going on here, or that the underlying allegations are most likely true, and that itself turns voters off?
But let's take a look at that, what you just said. The idea that we could see a trial taking place right smack dab in the middle of the 2024 primaries. Just give us an idea of what that would look like.
I mean, I have no idea what it looks like is the easy answer. Look, get your calendar out, though. I mean, the judge is saying he wants to have a next conference on this in December. That may be a month, maybe 6 weeks before the first voting. The Iowa caucuses right now look like they'll come sometime in the middle or later part of January. And if you then, after that, start a trial in January, February, March, that's smack dab in the middle of the time that you would be having the intense primaries. If it gets pushed back a bit, you're running up against the Republican National Convention, or maybe even fall debates. 18 months is not that long for a trial to go.
Rick Klein, our thanks to you as always. And that is our show for this hour. I'm Lindsay Davis. Be sure to stay tuned to ABC News Live for more context and analysis of the day's top stories. Thanks so much for streaming with us. Coming up in the next hour, we're waiting to hear from Donald Trump himself just hours after he became the very first former U.S. president to ever be indicted. Our team of contributors is standing by with analysis and reaction to this historic day of events.
No matter what type of dog you have or cat you have, Frontline Plus lets you take them everywhere, no matter how you define it. Frontline, the #1 name in flea and tick protection.
Dove invited women who wanted their damaged hair trimmed.
Yes, I need a trim.
I just want to be able to cut the damage.
We tried Dove instead. So, still need that trim?
Oh my God! I'm actually shocked. I don't need a haircut.
Don't trim daily damage. Stop it with Dove.
This is America's #1 streaming news. ABC News Live. Breaking news, exclusives, live reporting across the globe. ABC News Live. Streaming free everywhere.
Brooke Shields, the most photographed woman in the world.
Sexualized child model.
Exploitation.
What happened to her isn't really about her, it's just about women.
I'm amazed that I survived any of it.
More Americans choose ABC News, America's #1 news source.
Fearless guardians protect this bridge to many worlds. For whomever controls this gateway controls them all. Resist the fracture and answer the Guardian's call. For if the stellar mirror falls, no world shall be spared.
I'm most like my mom because I'm arrogant, totally arrogant.
She was his hero, and it's really hard to see your hero fall.
My mother was a Black Panther, and she was really involved in the movement.
She wanted the story told correctly. That means blemishes and all. It was my responsibility to teach Tupac how to survive his reality.
Dear Mama, you are appreciated.
Reporting from Monterey Park, California, I'm Robin Roberts. Wherever the story is, we're going to take you there. You're streaming ABC News Live.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Lindsay Davis. Thank you so much for streaming with us. We begin with a moment that has never played out in American history. A former U.S. president has surrendered to authorities to be arrested and face criminal charges. Donald Trump has been charged with 34 felony counts of falsifying business records connected to hush money payments to 2 women and a doorman in the period leading up to the 2016 election. You can see the former president's ride from Trump Tower to criminal court in Lower Manhattan this afternoon, accompanied only by his Secret Service agents. From there, Trump surrendered and was processed as a criminal defendant and fingerprinted. He then took the elevator to the 15th floor, and after a quick look toward the camera, he walked into the courtroom. Only a few photos were allowed to be taken inside before the proceeding began. During the 57-minute-long hearing, Trump pleaded not guilty to each of the 34 felony counts that he now faces. A short time after that, we got this, the indictment itself. And after the hearing, DA Alvin Bragg addressed the media and defended the case, saying New York City's election and financial integrity was at stake. And Bragg, who ran for office, vowed to hold Trump accountable. The former president touched down in Palm Beach just before 7 p.m. Eastern. He's expected to speak to supporters at his Mar-A-Lago home in just a few minutes. We're looking live inside the room right now where he's expected to speak. We'll bring you the beginning of that speech shortly, and our team is standing by to detail exactly what is in this indictment and where things go from here. Investigative reporter Aaron Katersky leads us off tonight from Manhattan.
Tonight, Donald Trump, the first president in American history to become a criminal defendant. All day, New York City on high alert. Police lining the streets around Trump Tower as Trump raised his fist, giving a wave as he stepped into a car. As his motorcade made its way downtown, sources tell ABC News that apart from his Secret Service detail, the former president rode alone. No lawyers, no family, no advisors with him. Approaching criminal court in Lower Manhattan, Trump posting on social media seems so surreal. Wow, they are going to arrest me. Outside court, small groups of supporters and opponents. Police keeping the peace as the former president arrived. Inside, Trump surrendered. He was arrested, booked, and processed like a common criminal. His fingerprints taken, but no mugshot. Trump was taken upstairs in an elevator usually reserved for judges. Stone-faced officers escorting him into the courtroom.
President Trump, will you come speak to us? President Trump?
Then that first picture, Trump at the defendant's table, his shoulders slumped, hands in his lap, flanked by his lawyers. Court officers standing behind him. Minutes later, the indictment unsealed. The former president himself pleading not guilty to those 34 felony charges that he repeatedly and fraudulently falsified New York business records to conceal criminal conduct that hid damaging information from the voting public during the 2016 presidential election. Trump then walking out of court without a word.
How did you plead, President Trump? How did you plead? President Trump.
Prosecutors allege Trump orchestrated a criminal scheme with his former lawyer and fixer Michael Cohen and his friend, former National Enquirer publisher David Pecker, to pay hush money to at least 3 people, including porn actress Stormy Daniels.
A catch and kill scheme. That is a scheme to buy and suppress negative information to help Mr. Trump's chance of winning the election.
An effort allegedly to prevent damaging stories from tipping the balance in a tight election where voters were unhappy with both candidates. Prosecutors say in a 2015 Trump Tower meeting, Pecker told Trump he would act as the eyes and ears for the campaign by looking out for negative stories. And in June of 2016, just months before the election, they say Pecker informed Trump a woman, believed to be former Playboy model Karen McDougal, had approached the Enquirer, claiming she once had an affair with Trump. Prosecutors charged that Trump was concerned about the effect it could have on his candidacy, and he and Pecker and Cohen had a series of discussions about who should pay off McDougal to secure her silence. Ultimately, the Enquirer paid McDougal $150,000 for her story, but never published it. Prosecutors allege Trump also arranged for a $130,000 payment to Stormy Daniels a few months later. And the Enquirer paid off a Trump Tower doorman who was trying to sell a story about Trump fathering a child, a story the tabloid later concluded was not true. The indictment charges Trump disguised the criminal scheme by falsifying business records.
34 false statements made to cover up other crimes. These are felony crimes in New York State, no matter who you are. We cannot and will not normalize serious criminal conduct.
But the former president's attorneys insisting there's no way Donald Trump would have been charged if he wasn't Donald Trump.
Well, everyone is not above the law. No one's below it either. And if this man's name was not Donald J. Trump, there is no scenario we'd all be here today. Please understand that based on these charges.
Aaron Katersky joins us now. Aaron, is there anything in these unsealed documents that surprised you?
You know, I think there's nothing surprising in terms of new facts, as the district attorney himself said, but I think they reframed how they were looking at this case, and maybe that's what led to these criminal charges, Lindsay. They went back to 2015 and a doorman at Trump Tower who alleged that Trump had some kind of illegitimate child, a story that the National Enquirer confirmed wasn't true. They took a look at the payment to Karen McDougal and to Stormy Daniels. And while they did not charge a conspiracy, they certainly described this conspiracy to scheme to defraud the voters in the 2016 presidential election by withholding real information about what Trump was up to. Instead, the prosecutor said he falsified records to conceal the payments that he was making. And that's what led them to charge these 34 different felonies, Lindsay.
And what do we know about when this case will go to trial?
So the prosecutors wanted to go to trial in January, and the defense said that's way too aggressive and pushed for a trial next spring. But either way, that's going to put the trial of former President Trump, Republican presidential candidate Trump, right at the height of the election season. So this case and all of its legal maneuvering is going to be caught up in American politics.
And not only will this case coincide with the election season, as you just said, but he has several other investigations moving forward. So if they are to hand up an indictment in those cases, would one of them, would they continue consecutively, or would they all, go on one after the other?
Yeah, it's a great question. As far as we know, Lindsay, there's no coordination among Alvin Bragg, the DA here, Fonnie Wills in Fulton County in Georgia, or the special counsel, Jack Smith. All three prosecutors have investigations involving former President Trump. And it's not just those criminal cases. Lindsay, the former president has to be back here in New York at the end of the month because he's going on trial in a civil case brought by a former Elle magazine columnist, E. Jean Carroll, who alleged that Trump defamed her and has accused him of battery in connection with an alleged rape that he denies back in the 1990s. So his legal problems are only continuing to mount.
And when we talk about the legal problems and the legal fees, once he declared that he was running for president, is it my understanding correct that the RNC then would no longer pay for his legal fees? Do we know who's paying for his legal fees?
Well, he has some political action committees that may be contributing to paying his lawyers, and we're not sure what the arrangements with his lawyers are, but he has attorneys working on a number of fronts. You saw the criminal lawyers in court today, Joe Tacopina, Todd Blanche, and Susan Necklace. Tacopina is going to be defending him along with Alina Habba in the civil case involving defamation. He has a $250 million civil lawsuit from the New York Attorney General that has a whole separate slate of attorneys, plus whoever's working on the special counsel investigation and the Georgia election tampering investigation. So the legal bills mount along with the legal peril for the former president.
Aaron Katersky, it'll be interesting to see if he asks his supporters for money based on this tonight. And we are taking a live look there inside Mar-A-Lago, where we're expecting the former president to speak within just minutes. And I do want to bring in ABC's Jay O'Brien, who joins us now from Mar-A-Lago. And Jay, we see the supporters are all gathered in there. They have the flags lined up. What can we expect to hear?
Well, we've heard there are a number of people in that room, Lindsay. Mar-A-Lago are those lights right over my shoulder here. I was speaking earlier today with Mar-A-Lago staff. They had prepared, the campaign told them to prepare for an event with roughly 700 people. It's unclear if they'll get to that number, but we know there are a number of high-profile Trump supporters in that room. Some of them are elected Republicans. Marjorie Taylor Greene is there. An aide to Matt Gaetz told me he is also going to be there. A local congressman from this area, Brian Mast, also saying to me that he will be be in attendance there. What we expect to hear from Trump is unclear, but we know, according to reporting from our Rachel Scott, from John Santucci, from Catherine Faulders, that Trump has been revising this speech up to the last minute, and they tell those that I just mentioned that Trump was angry having left court this afternoon. So the question that he faces tonight is, what does he say politically about that arraignment, that historic arraignment that he encountered today? And what does his messaging look like going forward, as he is this active criminal defendant and also, of course, a candidate for the White House? And tonight will be the first test of what the Trump campaign does with this messaging. I can tell you Trump aides believe that this indictment can only help their candidate politically, particularly in a GOP primary. So we'll see how Trump tries to communicate that message tonight, Lindsay.
And Jay, of course, this is not a press conference. He's speaking to supporters. Do you have any idea of who in particular will be attending tonight?
Well, in addition to those members of Congress I mentioned, we're getting reporting that there are MAGA world celebrities in that room, podcasters and the like. There's reporting that Roger Stone is also there, a number of South Florida allies of the former president. But we also heard from some Republican members of Congress who are not going to be there tonight. Lindsey Graham telling Rachel Scott earlier that he will not be in attendance. I heard from a number of House Republicans, some in the House Freedom Caucus, which are staunch Trump supporters typically, who said that they just could not make it tonight. Some of them, despite being representatives who live right here in Florida. But nonetheless, the room expected to have a number of people in it. We are seeing more and more people file in. I'm on the road to Mar-A-Lago, and there was a long line of cars even to get in tonight, packing that room with supporters. And as you said, these aren't just remarks to reporters in the room. They aren't just remarks to a pool camera or a bay of television cameras. There are supporters in the room there. It has a campaign rally type feel to it, it seems. So how Trump talks to that room, we know he likes to work a crowd. And what he says after this historic arraignment is what a lot in the political world are watching tonight. All eyes really on the former president, Lindsay.
Jay, I was right outside of Trump Tower on Fifth Avenue here in New York City today. I can tell you just the police presence was really rather extraordinary. Curious what kind of precautions we see police taking there outside and inside of Mar-A-Lago.
Well, it's interesting. I was talking to sources here in Palm Beach County, the town of Palm Beach, across the water from us here. This is West Palm Beach, where we're standing now. And every single police source I called said they had been preparing for this moment from when Trump posted on his social media platform that he was going to be arrested. Now, that obviously proved to be erroneous. He wasn't arrested the day he said he was going to be. But we heard from police who said they were preparing for this moment from that onwards, both for pro-Trump demonstrations that might get crowded. There were some who were obviously here along this motorcade route today and things of that nature. But we heard from various authorities who said they had plans in place from the get-go here. And we did see them enact some of that. I even saw a huge Trump motorcade, Lindsay, as you saw in New York. It was the largest motorcade I had seen the former president travel in since he was the president. Oftentimes when former President Trump travels here in Florida, it's 1 or 2 or 3 SUVs. He's often traveling to the golf course down the street from Mar-A-Lago here. But when he returned from the airport here in West Palm Beach to Mar-A-Lago here, there was a huge line of cars with police and motorcycles and obviously SUVs carrying Trump aides as well, Lindsay.
Jay O'Brien, our thanks to you. And for more now, let's bring in Adam Kaufman, who is the former chief of investigations in former Manhattan District Attorney Cyrus Vance's office. Thank you so much for being with us tonight. You know how these types of investigations are prosecuted. In reading this indictment and statement of facts, what do you think the biggest hurdle will be for DA Alvin Bragg?
Thanks, Lindsay. So the indictment itself is what we call a bare bones indictment. It doesn't really speak to the facts of the case. It just sets forth the bare minimum of what is legally required in describing the falsification of the business records. The biggest challenge I see here, if you read the statement of fact, it crafts a fairly compelling narrative that sort of shifts the focus from just about this relationship with Stormy Daniels and the falsification of internal records and makes it about an attempt to improperly influence an election. And it goes through the doorman, the Karen McDougal incident, details about the National Enquirer. And so it really crafts this much broader narrative than just the Stormy Daniels payments and cover-up. I think the challenge for the DA will be whether all of that information is admitted at trial. There's a lot of information that's separate than the criminal acts themselves. And there's going to be extensive litigation between the defense team and the prosecution as to how much of those facts are going to come in before the jury at the trial.
Were you surprised that there are 34 felony counts?
No, under New York procedural rules, each of the false records has to be its own count. It's sort of a quirk of New York procedure. And so the number of counts simply speaks to the number of times Mr. Trump made or caused to be made some sort of false record in the Trump organization.
Is there anything the former president could say tonight that might make a judge reconsider a gag order?
Sure. I mean, absolutely. We don't know what he's going to say, but if he starts, if his comments are overly inflammatory about the judge, the prosecutor, if he references their families, I think that could definitely have an impact. I don't think that Judge Merchan is going to put up with that type of rhetoric. I think he'll recognize that, Mr. Trump has a right to speak out, has a right to address his constituents in the country in light of what happened today. But I do think there are limits. And I think Mr. Trump's legal team has probably advised him not to go too far and not to be overly inflammatory in what he says tonight.
So much of what we're hearing is about the politics of it all. But asking just for your professional opinion in the legal world, would you have brought these charges against the former president?
I hate that question. It's a case where when you read the statement of fact, I think if I put on my prosecutor hat, it's a hard case to walk away from. Because it really makes the case that he tried to subvert the election. So having read the statement of fact, it explains to me in much greater detail why this case was brought. And so I think it makes a strong case for itself.
Adam Kaufman, we thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate you coming on the show.
Thank you.
And now let's bring in former federal prosecutor Renato Mariotti into the conversation. Thank you so much for joining us. Is there anything about the indictment that surprised you?
Well, quite a bit. I mean, one thing in particular that was surprising is the reference to potential tax violations. So, as you've discussed before, this is obviously a indictment that's focused on false statements and business records. But what makes this crime a felony is that it was allegedly done in furtherance of other crimes. It's really unspecified here what those crimes are, but they did talk about tax crimes. And I think that could be potentially more compelling for the jury. It's a safer bet than the campaign finance crimes, which are also mentioned in the indictment.
We've heard from some Republicans being concerned about the politicization of the justice system. DA Alvin Bragg ran for office saying that he wanted to hold Trump accountable. Do you share any of the Republican concerns about our justice system being politicized?
Well, I certainly am always concerned about politicization of the Justice Department. I think it's been a concern of mine over the past years, including when Trump was in office and there was, interference with the Justice Department and, trying to fire Robert Mueller and so on. I think that, there are legitimate questions regarding this indictment. And I share some of those concerns and some of those questions. That said, I think a lot of the commentary about it has been political. I mean, there was a lot of attacks on this indictment from people who hadn't read it yet. Now that we've read it, I still have questions about it. But I think at the same time, prosecutors obviously have to be able to charge politicians who are corrupt. I live in the Chicago area. We have plenty of corrupt politicians around here that need to be policed.
How long does a trial like this typically take?
A trial like this, I would expect, would take at least a week. It's a fairly complex fact pattern. There are a number of different payoffs. They're going to have to introduce a significant number of business records, and they're going to have to put in witnesses to get those records in. And then, of course, there'd be a number of different potential witnesses. Mr. Pecker, who owned the company that that the National Enquirer is published from, and Michael Cohen and Stormy Daniels and several others.
Well, I asked how long you expect the trial to take. I guess I should have asked, how long do you anticipate until the trial begins? Do you expect significant delays?
For sure. That trial likely would not take place before the 2024 election, unless Trump absolutely wanted it to. In other words, he'd have to push forward and try to get a speedy trial in order to get this done before the election, which would ordinarily be a very valid legal strategy in this circumstance. But I suspect he won't do that, in part because of the campaign and in part because he seems to have tried to delay other legal cases.
Former federal prosecutor Renato Mariotto, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
I want to show you some video of Trump's family arriving in Mar-A-Lago with Marjorie Taylor Greene, as well as Matt Gaetz as well. You see Donald Trump Jr. there right in the front, followed by Marjorie Taylor Greene, and then Matt Gaetz. Marjorie Taylor Greene right there. Republican Senator Mitt Romney, the only Republican senator to vote to convict Trump twice in his impeachment trials, accused Bragg of pursuing a political agenda, saying the prosecutor's overreach sets a dangerous precedent for criminalizing political opponents and damages the public's faith in our justice system. ABC News contributor and former FBI special agent in charge, Rich Frankel, joins us now. Rich, thank you so much for joining us. Romney is, of course, regarded as a more centrist member of the Republican Party. What does it tell you about the public response to these charges when he's coming out against them?
Well, you definitely have a split here in the United States of those who are with, the former president and those who are against the former president. And, I don't know if this trial is actually going to change anyone. Those who believe President Trump is good and should be the next president are going to continue to vote for him, and this is not going to change their view. And the same is happening for those who are anti-President Trump. This will not change their vote. They will continue to be anti-Trump throughout his political time.
Rich, as we're taking a look now live at Mar-A-Lago, expecting the former president to come out just any moment, I am curious what your reaction was when you heard the 34 felony counts of falsifying business records.
Well, initially I heard 34 and I went, wow, that's a lot. But then when you started to look at it and you realize that that it's basically 11 counts, or numerous counts for the check and then numerous counts for the actual entries into the books and records of the company, I'm not that surprised by it then. It just goes to every time that they actually made a payment, that became another count.
And Marjorie Taylor Greene and others have taken to social media to criticize Bragg and the Democratic Party. Does some of the strong rhetoric that you're hearing, well, if you could stand by with us just for 1 second, Rich. Now we do see Donald Trump entering the ballroom there at Mar-A-Lago, about to approach the podium in just a little bit, getting ready to give his first remarks since pleading not guilty to those 34 felony counts of falsifying business records. You can see the room there, standing, trying to get their selfies and video of this historic moment. What a day it has been as we have been following Donald Trump from when he first left Mar-a-Lago yesterday, then landing, spending the night in Trump Tower. The native New Yorker, of course, making a return to his hometown to face a judge and be formally charged and fingerprinted. Again, the first former president to ever face criminal charges. Jay O'Brien, just before he makes his way to the podium, want to send it over to you as far as what you're hearing the expectation is for tonight.
Yeah, the expectation, we've heard reporting from our team who's inside there, including Rachel Scott, who says Trump has been working on this speech up to the final moments. It is perhaps one of the closest watched speeches he's ever delivered. Every single speech, it seems, that follows a historic event with this president and this now former president seems to be more closely watched than the next. But none could possibly be more historic, potentially, than becoming the first former president, the first active presidential candidate to be arraigned in court, to be arrested, to be brought up on charges, and then the same day to give a campaign speech, which is what this is expected to be. Lindsay, there are supporters in that room, don't forget. There are allies of the former president in that room. There are family members of former President Donald Trump in that room. It is a rally-type atmosphere. This is a campaign-style speech following a court appearance.
And we'll see if he's able to generate. You see right there on the sign the number to text if you want to support the former president, now presidential candidate, running once again for 2024. You see that right there on the podium. Once again, make America great again, as we prepare to listen in. Hey.
Thank you very much, everybody. And we have to save our country. God bless you all. God bless you all. And I never thought anything like this could happen in America. Never thought it could happen. The only crime that I have committed is to fearlessly defend our nation from those who seek to destroy it. From the beginning, the Democrats spied on my campaign. Remember that? They attacked me with an onslaught of fraudulent investigations. Russia, Russia, Russia. Ukraine, Ukraine, Ukraine. Impeachment hoax number 1. Impeachment hoax number 2. The illegal and unconstitutional raid on Mar-A-Lago right here. The lying to the FISA courts, the FBI and DOJ relentlessly pursuing Republicans, the unconstitutional changes to election laws by not getting approvals from state legislators, the millions of votes illegally stuffed into ballot boxes and all caught on government cameras. And just recently, the FBI and DOJ in collusion with Twitter and Facebook in order not to say anything bad about the Hunter Biden laptop from hell, which exposes the Biden family as criminals and which, according to the pollsters, would have made a 17-point difference in the election result. And we needed a lot less than that, like about 16.9. It would have been in our favor, not my favor, our favor, because our country is going to hell. And we remember the 51 intelligence agents who said Hunter Biden's laptop was Russian disinformation. It didn't exist. It was Russian disinformation. Remember that? And that was all confirmed strongly by the FBI when they all knew that it wasn't Russian disinformation. And so much more. Our elections were like those of a third world country. And now this massive election interference at a scale never seen before in our country, beginning with the radical left, George Soros-backed prosecutor Alvin Bragg of New York, who campaigned on the fact that he would get President Trump. I'm going to get him. I'm going to get him. This is a guy campaigning. He wanted to get President Trump at any cost, and this before he knew anything about me, didn't know a thing about me. He was campaigning. As it turns out, virtually everybody that has looked at this case, including rhinos and even hardcore Democrats, say there is no crime and that it should never have been brought. Never have been brought. Everybody. Even people that aren't big fans have said it. They said this is not the right thing to do. It's an insult to our country, as the world is already laughing at us for so many other reasons, like our open borders, our incompetent withdrawal from Afghanistan, where we left behind American citizens, $85 billion worth of the best military equipment in the world, lost 13 magnificent young lives, and far too many to mention that are so badly hurt with the loss of arms and legs and facial obliteration. The most embarrassing time in our country's history, in my opinion. then give up on energy independence and even energy dominance. We're going to be dominant within 6 months, more than any other nation ×2. We had this all just 3 years ago. Our raging crime statistics, if you look in Democrat-run cities, numbers the likes of which we have never seen before. The open threats by various countries of the use of nuclear weapons, something never mentioned or discussed by outside nations during the Trump administration, and which could very well lead under the Biden administration's leadership to an all-out nuclear World War III can happen. We're not very far away from it, believe it or not. An economy that has been crippled by the biggest inflation we have seen in more than 60 years.
We will continue monitoring the remarks from former President Trump and bring them to you as we see fit throughout the show. Do you want to talk about a little that he was mentioning disinformation, and of course he did suggest some inaccuracies there. One, comparing our election system to that of a third world country, talking about massive election interference that has been debunked and disputed. There have been no widespread irregularities reported in our election system. But again, we will continue to keep you updated with his latest remarks tonight from Mar-A-Lago. In the meantime, I want to bring back in our ABC News legal contributor and former federal prosecutor, Con Nowadays, to talk us through the details of the indictment. Con, thank you so much for being here. One, if we can just go to a point that we're hearing from Donald Trump now. First, he started right off really kind of bad-mouthing the DA, Alvin Bragg. Is there any reason for concern that this might be an obstruction by him doing so?
I don't think so, Lindsay. I think former President Trump, he's walking within the lines here. He's not saying anything that can be seen as inflammatory or anything that can be seen as a threat to DA Bragg. In my view, what he's saying is he's just professing his innocence, which he has every right to do.
Are you surprised at all that the judge did not? And many people have discussed the potential for a gag order. Were you expecting that?
I thought there was a good chance that there would be one, and that was based on the rhetoric that was coming from the former president as well as his the people who support him, because there is a danger that rhetoric can lead to violence. And I think the prosecutors were right to bring up the fact that there have been threats against DA Bragg.
Beyond the specific 34 counts for falsifying business records, the statement of facts in this case attempt to establish a wider narrative. What's notable there?
I think what's notable is exactly what Alvin Bragg said, which is this is just not about falsifying business records. It's about covering up another crime, a serious crime, which is election fraud.
What would be the bar for a gag order at this point? What kinds of things would he have to say tonight in order for the judges to say, hey, look, that's enough?
I think something very explicit, something rallying his supporters to action, something like that, which I don't think he's going to go there. I think he's been cautioned. He has very good lawyers. He's been cautioned by them to stay as far away from that kind of talk as he can.
How is a statement of facts like the DA released today different from just including a conspiracy count in the charges?
It is different because it's not an additional charge that's been presented in the indictment. So that is a little strange that there was no conspiracy count in the indictment, and they're setting forth the concept of a conspiracy separately as part of their proof for the counts that were charged.
And the indictment also discusses an intent to defraud and to commit another crime, which makes it a felony. Why is that significant?
That's significant for multiple reasons, one of which is a felony means potentially greater prison time, more than a year. It also means that there's a greater statute of limitations. With a felony, you can bring the case within 5 years, whereas with the misdemeanor, you have to bring it within 2 years of the crime. So if Trump's defense team is successful in knocking down through a motion to dismiss or something like that, the case from a felony to a misdemeanor, then I think the DA's case is going to be very fragile because they'll have a statute of limitations problem.
The statement of facts details the timing of the meetings and payments relative to this election. How is the motive, or to that past election, how is that potential motive campaign ambitions rather than personal concerns important legally?
Oh, it's absolutely critical. One defense that I imagine Trump's defense team will put forth is that the purpose of the payments wasn't to further his campaign. It was to protect his family because he didn't want his family to know about these affairs. And frankly, that was the successful defense that former Senator John Edwards used in his defense in a similar case. So it's absolutely critical that the prosecutors show that the purpose of these payments was to further a campaign interest, not a personal interest.
You brought up John Edwards. Does it matter? Is it relevant at all that in that case John Edwards was not denying the affair? In this case, Trump is denying the affair. Is that relevant at all legally?
It's not relevant legally. I think what is relevant too is, frankly, his credibility. And the credibility of the witnesses. Because what will happen during the trial is if Trump maintains that he did not have these affairs, then his team is going to try to impeach the credibility of the witnesses who claim that the affair actually occurred.
ABC News legal contributor and former federal prosecutor Con Nowadays. Thank you so much, Con.
Thank you.
And now let's bring back in Jay O'Brien. He joins us now. Jay, this was clearly and continues to be a political speech with Trump quite quickly going after Hunter Biden and airing falsehoods against the Biden family. Who is the audience that's there tonight?
Well, I think that's a really good question, Lindsay, because this is veering into red meat and also just to things that you often hear former President Donald Trump say that aren't necessarily red meat, just par for the course with him. I want to set the stage as to where we're standing, just to give you a sense. Those lights across the water from me, that's Mar-A-Lago. That's where the speech is playing out. This is about as close as anyone in the general public can get. One of the things we heard earlier in the evening was Trump talking about how rhinos, as he put it, were people who said that this indictment was not necessarily something that was legal, and it was instead in the course of what they call the weaponization of the justice system. And what he's referring to there, for instance, is Mitt Romney, Republican senator of Utah, and others who are no fans of former President Trump, who came out today. Mitt Romney said he believes that prosecutors stretched these charges, were his words, to, quote, fit a political agenda. We heard from Mike Pence, who had a very public break with former President Trump after January 6th. He said over the weekend he doesn't like these charges because he believes they're also politically motivated. So Trump seizing on those who defended him, who might not agree with him on virtually anything else at this point, and using that to say, in his view, that these charges are politically motivated. That's the one side of the equation. And then, as you said, there's a red meat side to this equation. He talked about the 2020 election, as he so often talks about. He talked about Hunter Biden, and that speech is still ongoing. As we said earlier in the night, this is a campaign-style speech that follows a court appearance. That room is packed with supporters, and this is a re-election speech, and it goes within the larger theme that we've heard from Trump aides who say that they believe this indictment helps the former president, in their view, politically, particularly when it comes to the Republican nomination. And what you're watching play out tonight is the former president leaning into that strategy. It remains to be seen if that strategy plays out. Does it help him with the GOP nomination? And then, of course, does it help him in a general election where you have to win independents and you might even have to flip some Democrats, Lindsay? And
so far, it seems that it is helping him based on the numbers that Rick Klein was reporting earlier, based on the polls. Clearly, it does seem that the former president is relishing the attention that he's getting over this case. Do you feel that he's using this opportunity to just give the laundry list of grievances on all the various legal cases now against him?
He seems to be. He's talked about the indictment that he was arraigned for today, but he also talked about what he calls the boxes hoax. He's referring to the classified documents investigation swirling around Mar-A-Lago. It seems like he's listing off a series of grievances and a series of investigations that have swirled around this Donald Trump since he was president and now into his time as a former president. So he's using this occasion to do just that. He's also using this larger notion of an indictment to try to rally support from Republicans. We know that over the last few days, since news of the indictment broke on Thursday night, even a little bit before that, Trump had been calling Republican allies to make sure that they supported him. And in the reporting of our Rachel Scott and Will Staken, for instance, it appears that Trump is taking notice of who comes out and who publicly defends him. We have some people willing to publicly defend him and show up there tonight. As we've been reporting, Marjorie Taylor Greene is inside that room. Matt Gaetz is inside that room. Matt Gaetz even walked in with members of the Trump family. Donald Trump Jr. and Kimberly Guilfoyle walked in and got applause from the crowd, according to our Will Staken. So there are those who are willing to physically stand with the former president here at Mar-A-Lago tonight, and then there are those Republicans who are willing to symbolically stand with him. Even Kevin McCarthy, the highest-ranking House Republican, tweeting that House Republicans are going to use their newfound power and investigate Alvin Bragg, the Manhattan district attorney, for, as they say, using federal funds to investigate former President Trump. Now, Bragg's office has pushed back against that investigation, saying in a sense that House Republicans are sticking their nose where it shouldn't belong and attempting to influence this inquiry. But that's what we're seeing play out, that Trump calling Republicans to come to his defense and Republicans largely taking up that mantle, Lindsay.
And as you said, even in some of the Republicans we haven't heard from, the McConnells, for example, the top GOP representatives who haven't said anything, their silence perhaps says so much. Jay O'Brien, I want to thank you for your time and insight tonight. Joining us now to get perspective from the GOP is Florida Representative Corey Mills. Congressman, I want to thank you for joining us. Just would like to start right off the top by asking you what your thoughts are on the day.
Well, I think that the entire thing has been grossly mishandled. I think that if we truly backed it all the way up from the campaigning time of DA Alvin Bragg, where this is exactly what he said, is that he was going to utilize his position to investigate and indict the president. I think that if we look at his primary funding sources, which is people like George Soros and others who have political motive behind this, if you look at the increase from misdemeanor to felony, and even the way that they broke it out, to where instead of saying that it was a single incident of the $130,000 payment, broke it down into 34 charges based on multiple increments that was given that totaled up into the additional money. I just think that when you look at all of these things, it's hard to argue that this is not a politically motivated investigation.
And I want to take a step back for a second, because the former president does have the presumption of innocence on his side. The prosecutors have the burden of proving him guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. Why do you think that a large majority of Republicans who are at least deciding to be vocal about this are not just letting the legal process play out? Instead, they're attacking the district attorney. Instead, they're talking about how this is about politics and not anything that was illegally done.
Well, let's go ahead and talk about what you just stated, and it was correctly stated, which is that in America, under the rule of law, you are innocent until proven guilty. Now, that's a very big contrast to what former Speaker Nancy Pelosi said, where she said that he'll have a chance in the jury to prove his innocence. And so you're saying the silent parts aloud. You're seeing where they are trying to look at things, and as you talked about with your correspondent, things like the gag order, realizing that not only is the former president running as the 2024 presidential candidate in the Republican Party, but being able to respond to the accusations, being able to respond to allegations is a very big part of defense. And so not being able to even respond to that almost would seem as if, in the media in many cases would, utilize as a self-admission. And so I have no problems with rule of law. I have no problems with allowing things to play out. But when you can see that they're politically motivated and they're in an attempt to try and stifle political opposition, this is the issues that we have. And especially when you look at the judge themselves and what his daughter does, which is a very well-known Democrat strategist. When you look at what DA Alvin Bragg stated during his actual run, I think it's hard to take in all those things and say this is not politically driven in any way.
Before I let you go, our congressional correspondent Rachel Scott has been at campaign events for your governor, Ron DeSantis, and his supporters have told her that they back him over Trump because of the distractions and, quote, chaos that comes with Trump. Do you think that your governor will get a boost of support out of this?
Well, I think that the governor, and we're blessed in the state of Florida to have the greatest governor in America, but I think that the governor was very clear that he, too, doesn't agree with what is happening with regards to the Manhattan DA. And so I think that, if anything, we've seen where it's been record fundraising. People are rallying behind the president, as your correspondent had talked about, people like Senator Mitt Romney and others who have been very vocal about President Trump in a negative way are starting to rally behind. And what we want to see is the rights of his Fourth and Sixth Amendment, which has been continually violated, like it was in Mar-A-Lago, to be upheld. We want to see actual rightful trial. We don't want to see things that are being manipulated in our judiciary system being weaponized, which we have seen continually. And so we want to make sure that the American people know that we will not stand here in Congress as the majority for this weaponization to go against political oppositions.
Congressman from Florida, Corey Mills, we thank you so much for your time. I appreciate you coming on the show.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Former President Trump began his speech reacting to the charges and what he claims was his, quote, only crime. Let's listen.
And I never thought anything like this could happen in America. Never thought it could happen. The only crime that I have committed is to fearlessly defend our nation from those who seek to destroy it.
ABC News political director Rick Klein joins us now. Rick, was this about the tenor that you were expecting from Trump tonight?
This is a campaign speech, pure and simple. It's also a campaign speech that's going to remind a lot of Republicans of the downside of Donald Trump, particularly in this third run for the White House. This speech is about him. It's about his grievances. It's about the investigations into him. There are almost too many falsehoods and half-truths to even begin to fact-check Lindsay. And as it's gone on, he has hit a lot of the greatest hits of the Mueller investigation, of the Georgia investigation, the documents probe. All of those things have come together. There hasn't been a lot about why he's in the campaign or what the cause of the American people is. There also hasn't been a lot of detailed denial, to what I've heard so far, of the facts at hand. This is an attempt for him to weave all of the swirling events into a narrative that benefits him, and he's really good at that, as we've seen many times. He's someone that's been counted out countless times, and he's able to rally back and get his supporters back. This is a friendly crowd, but it may be a less friendly overall electorate as the reality of these charges settle in and as the long haul gears up.
Well, let's talk about the electorate. From what you're seeing, how are potential voters responding to this indictment?
Yeah, look, when we were in the field on this late last week and into the weekend, we saw a lot of people reserving judgment. We saw a good, solid chunk of the country, a plurality of about 45%, a little less than half, who thought that the charges were warranted, and another 20 or so points of people that say that they want to see more. And to see that number, a similar number of people that want to stay on the sidelines in the Republican Party, I think speaks to the political challenge of Donald Trump at this moment. And I think more broadly, as we've heard the discussion tonight, the idea that he is stronger in the Republican primary despite this, maybe even because of this, is something that has a lot of Republicans significantly concerned about where their party is heading into the 2024 cycle. Donald Trump is great at creating and spinning up these narratives and making himself the victim and building up his political standing and rallying people to his side as a result of it. What he isn't so good at and hasn't been good at in recent elections is getting a majority of the country to agree with him on it. That's why he lost in 2020. That's why a lot of his candidates lost in 2022. So the idea that you're getting this back together, getting new momentum for this, there are a lot of Republicans I've been talking to in the last couple of days who are worried about that, even if they aren't really swirling around Trump right now and criticizing him directly. We've seen a lot of their critiques focus on the propriety of these charges being filed at all. The fact is, this creates a new and unpredictable chapter in the Trump show where he is going to be at the middle of all of this, less able to control things, but in a comfortable position in that he is where the center of the action will be.
What stands out to you so far about Republican leaders' responses?
It's been quite muted in terms of the direct defense of his actions. I haven't really seen anyone who has said that all of this was appropriate, that the payment to Stormy Daniels, the efforts to cover that up, the efforts to try to obstruct any of the information and create a paper trail that was false around it would be okay. Most of the defense has been the prosecutor has political motivations in bringing this, or these charges are beyond what they should be. They are not an appropriate felony. There isn't a case that can be made. And that might be the case. This will be a challenging case to play out. But you don't see many or any Republicans willing to defend this on the merits. I think they don't want to focus on that. Even in Trump's speech tonight, we've heard a lot of whataboutism. He talked about Hunter Biden and the Biden investigations pretty quickly. This is not a full-throated defense just of himself. It's trying to impugn the motives of his political critics.
And just lastly, Rick, you know, a lot of the times with politics, it's about imaging, right? It's about the image. Do you make anything that we haven't seen Melania all day, that she wasn't there with him in New York, that she's not there, at least visibly, in the room tonight in Mar-A-Lago?
Yeah, I sure do. Look, she's been very loyal to him. It's some politically difficult times in the past. I think she's very conscious of her own image. We've heard from her and people around her who've talked after the fact about how she knows how these things play. And I think her absence from the frame tonight is telling. The lack of her presence in and around the courtroom earlier today is telling. Look, at its heart, this is about a cover-up of payments that were made to someone he was having an extramarital affair with. That's the allegation. There's several allegations in there today. A deeply embarrassing day for Melania Trump, and I do think it says something that she's not there.
All right, Rick Klein, our thanks to you as always. I'd like to bring in Asha Rankapai, Assistant Dean for the Yale-Jackson School of Global Affairs. She joins us now. Thank you for talking with us tonight. Beyond the specific 34 counts for falsifying business records, the statement of facts in this case attempts to establish a wider narrative. What's notable there to you?
Yes. So the indictment itself is focusing on these reimbursement payments to Stormy Daniels, but the statement of facts places this in the context of a larger effort, an agreement between Donald Trump, his lawyer Michael Cohen, and AMI, the parent company of the National Enquirer, to bury stories that they identified that could be detrimental to the campaign. And so the Stormy Daniels story is just one of several that are listed here. One is a salacious story that Trump's doorman was about to tell about a child that Trump had fathered out of wedlock. So they bought that story. There's the Karen McDougal story. So it's putting this in a broader effort. One thing that really stood out to me was a detail that I don't think I've heard before regarding the Stormy Daniels payment, which was that Trump allegedly wanted to wait to pay her until after the election passed, and then they could renege on the agreement, because then it would no longer be valuable. And I think this really goes to, if Bragg can prove that, this idea that this was really about helping his election chances. It wasn't about saving himself from embarrassment or for personal reasons. So that stood out to me as well.
This case in New York City, it was the first in a progression of investigations into the former president. Do you see a common thread between this, Georgia, January 6th, some of the other investigations?
Yeah, Lindsay, you know, I kind of think of these as serial election crimes. I mean, by putting this in this broader scheme, what Bragg has done is said, look, this was basically an attempt to cheat in this election. And if you look at, you know, Georgia, that was allegedly an attempt to cheat in an election. And then, of course, January 6th was an attempt to literally obstruct the proceedings of Congress, but also present these false electors, et cetera. So I do think that these are really of a piece, and that this is not, at least the way that Bragg has presented it, as much of an outlier as it has been characterized until today.
And as you see there, we were just looking at the split screen of Mar-A-Lago that Donald Trump has left the ballroom there. Curious, what other details from the indictment stood out to you today?
There is one section at the end of the indictment which is about the pressure campaign on Michael Cohen after he starts, after he's being investigated. And again, this kind of goes to the intent element, that they were pressuring him not to cooperate. And remember, at this point, the Stormy Daniels payment had come out. So the only thing that they would want him to keep secret were these financial shenanigans that are listed here. Though I will say, Lindsay, having said all of that, this is thinner than I expected in terms of laying out the precise legal theory. So we don't know, for example, what precise crimes that the DA is trying to hook these falsification of business record misdemeanors to in order to bump these up to a felony. That's kind of the big thing that I was looking for as a lawyer, and that's not in here. And I'm not really sure when we're going to know precisely what statutes he is really looking at using in this prosecution.
So that's not to say that it won't be forthcoming. It's just to say that you didn't see it today. Is that accurate?
That's accurate. And I think it opens the door for some speculation that, you know, he might be using a novel legal theory or he might be trying to go down roads that we just don't know. On the other hand, in some ways, it has focused our attention on this statement of facts and this story that he wants to tell about where Stormy Daniels fits into this bigger picture and this attempt to influence the election. So it might be strategic, I'm not sure, but I think that we'll eventually get those details in the future.
Looks like we see Roger Stone there among those shaking hands as they're about to depart Mar-A-Lago. We learned about some of the potential witnesses in this case. Is it a strong list for the prosecution?
I think so. I mean, the three main players here, it looks like, from this statement of facts are, you know, Donald Trump, Michael Cohen, and David Pecker. And obviously, Donald Trump is a defendant, so he's not going to be very helpful for the prosecution. But the key here is that Michael Cohen and David Pecker already have their stories on the record. Cohen pleaded guilty. And he has his version that the federal government already accepted and has presented to a court. And David Pecker actually came to a non-prosecution agreement with the federal government in terms of this campaign finance violation. So his story is also on the record. They can't change this. And we know that some witnesses, like Stormy Daniels, testified to the grand jury. They know what she's going to say. But again, Lindsay, without really knowing what the legal theory is, what precise statutes he's using, it's hard to know, you know, how strong his case is in terms of the elements that he needs to prove. I think we still need to find out what he's going to be using for that.
So I know that you're saying you don't know how strong the case is, but I am curious to know, based on what you do know, do you feel that it was justified for him to bring this case forward, or do you feel that perhaps it is too thin, to use your terminology?
Well, I want to be clear. I think that what is presented here is too thin. I don't know what voluminous evidence he may have behind the scenes. And my understanding is that this type of pleading is actually quite usual for the Manhattan DAs. They don't do what are called speaking indictments in these kinds of cases, which really lays out, you know, sort of a saga and explains everything. So in some ways, he might just be treating Donald Trump just like every other defendant with the similar case. And we know that these falsification of business records is really a bread and butter type of case.
We're going to have to end it there. I'm so sorry.
Yeah.
We're out of time there. Yale University professor Asha Rankapa, we thank you so much.
Thanks.
And that is our show for tonight. I'm Lindsay Davis. ABC News Live is here for you all night with the latest news, context, and analysis. You can always find us on Hulu, the ABC News app, and, of course, abcnews.com. Have a great night.
No matter what type of dog you have or cat you have, Frontline Plus lets you take them everywhere, no matter how you define it. Frontline, the #1 name in flea and tick protection.
We've seen what you would do for a Klondike, so we're raising the bar. Now we want to see what your hometown would do for a Klondike. So get together and go for the bar, sandwich, or cone. Go for the glory. What'd you do for a Klondike?
Take America's #1 news with you anywhere you go, anytime, free. Download the ABC News app now. Breaking news, exclusives, 24/7. There for you with one touch. The ABC News app. Download it now.